Good evening. This is Redwood Wonk on Access Humboldt. You're either watching us on Channel 12, listening to us on KZZH, or possibly anywhere in the world on the internet. We've got a lot to talk about today. I'm with David Frank, as Chuck is taking a break for a little while. And I think what we're going to start with is this Friday is the jobs report comes in the first Friday of the month. The previous month's jobs report comes in. Sometimes it revises previous jobs reports, but last month I guess there was a really good report in terms of jobs in April. March, but April was kind of lacking. It was like only about 250,000 jobs. I forget exactly what it was, but what would be good on a normal time, but we're looking for robust recovery and a lot of debate as to why that's happening. And a lot of reports of restaurants having a hard time getting workers. Is it because of the unemployment benefits making everybody complacent, or is it because maybe restaurants need to put in, offer a little bit better deal? And let's talk about it, Dave.
Yeah, sure. So like you said, there was about 250,000 jobs last month in April that came out in this report. But they were expecting, I think the estimate was about 1 million jobs. And some people, experts, economists, even thought maybe 2 million jobs. And as you alluded to, this is because as more people are vaccinated and returning to the workforce, there was this expectation that the numbers would go up. And so for this month, which you said the report is coming out on Friday, for some reason, people are saying that this is critical. This is super important for the Biden administration. And so we should unpack that a little bit. They are expecting about 500,000 jobs, but some are saying maybe even 1 million, because that way we're going to get some from last month that didn't actually pan out on time. What's at stake here? Why is this important? Well, Republicans are making the case that because they're very critical of Biden handling of the economy, and that he's overreaching on the amounts that are involved in some of the bills that are being proposed. $1.9 trillion infrastructure bill, another nearly $2 trillion family bill, and they just want to cut this off at the pass and say that that the Democrat vision is not realistic, and that they're mismanaging the economy and they're going to drive it into the ditch. And so there are these debates. This is like the three-dimensional chess. The debates about can Biden's administration and Schumer's Senate get a negotiation for a bipartisan bill or not. So that's kind of why it's important this week. And not to get super into the weeds on this. But I want people to realize too, I think it's worth mentioning that these economic indicators, I think, should be taken in context. A lot of times these guesses, they're hits and misses. Then there's revisions based on factors, both statistical, which are technical, and also what I would call political, which are like macroeconomic policy in nature. So in other words, I don't think we should put too much weight on any given month, but know that it's part of a broader negotiation between the parties.
Let's also remember this is a pattern, and I don't want to point it to just one party, but it has been consistent. It's actually a doctrine of the Republicans since the 1980s to spend like crazy when they have a president in office, and then really obsess over budgets and deficits when they're not in office. Because obviously, when you stimulate an economy with Keynesian economics, you have more jobs and more people are happy. And they made it really difficult after this horrible crash, the worst crash since the Depression up until that time in 2008, made it really difficult for Obama to spend. Once they had taken over, they were saying that sort of made a rule that wherever you come up with new spending, you've got to offset it with cuts somewhere else. Well, that doesn't allow for Keynesianism, because Keynesianism is about deficit spending. So for the first time since World War II, he could only resort to monetarist policies to basically inch our way out of the recession, and then of course pointing out that they're attacking him for a jobless, one of the most jobless recoveries in history. I mean, cynicism, the cynicism of it, and of course the minute Trump was elected, the Republicans just cast off that rule, passed a huge spending bill, upped everything, including the military budget, cut taxes, and racked up deficits. And now that Biden is in office, all of a sudden they're concerned about the deficit again. I'm not saying there isn't hypocrisy on the Democratic side. There's hypocrisy everywhere, but this has just been so blatant since, I'm forgetting the name of the woman who came up with the doctrine, since the 1970s, but it is their policy when you have a Republican government spend and then really try to rein it back in when there's a Democrat in office. It hasn't worked. Every Democrat since then has gone 2 terms. I mean, well, there have only been 2, Obama and Clinton. And of course, Clinton, anyway, we could get into it, but that's really the politics of it. And so if there is a low job report, they're going to say, oh, we can't do the spending, there'll be inflation. Well, if there aren't that many jobs, there's probably not going to be a lot of inflation, but we'll see. But they want to use that as an excuse. And if there are 1 million jobs, they'll probably say, oh, we don't want to overheat the economy. They're going to fight it either way, any kind of spending, because people, if it means that wages are increasing and more people are employed, the president tends to get credit for it, whether or not the president deserves it. And if it collapses, the president tends to get blamed for it, whether or not they deserve it. And that's the politics of it, and that's where we're at.
So I alluded to this 3-dimensional chess idea, and I just want to bring. And I know it's cliche, but it's true. You got to keep your eye on the ball sometimes, but also sometimes you got to look at the big picture, take a step back. This is the most extraordinary economic crisis impact that we had, the COVID pandemic, where we literally shut down the economy. So statistics are skewed during this time period because of the drastic decrease and then increase in these numbers. So okay. we are still down 8 million jobs from pre-pandemic. That's number one. And a corollary to that is if we were continuing on trend over that duration of the pandemic, we would actually be down by about 10 million jobs. So one of the things I noticed, I was skimming some of the literature, and they're pointing out that we need to see an increase in jobs in both goods and services. So it's manufacturing and also services. And what a lot of people are thinking of is, well, the services are going to reopen, so that'll be a little bit of a bump. But what we really need is the underlying, manufacturing jobs and other the bigger stuff. So that's one piece that's worth mentioning. But so another element of this, which I thought was important, is that if this infrastructure bill passes, that's massive Keynesian stimulus, many jobs. So like the fight is occurring today to limit the ability to create those jobs, get better numbers for the future, have a better recovery and a stronger recovery, because they're already thinking about 2022 and 2024 confrontations.
I absolutely, and the arguments they're also making are that, well, we've got these unemployment benefits that are just making people lazy. They don't want to work, and restaurants are saying they're having a hard time getting jobs. They've got demand and they don't have people to join them. But I did read about an ice cream parlor in New York City that they're not New York City, so upstate New York, where they had been offering $8 an hour, and they thought, they're hearing the debates and people are saying, hey, you just have to offer more. And they went out and offered $15 an hour and got the best employees that they've ever had. And they're doing so well that he says, I don't see a difference in my bottom line. So, so the question is, the accusations of Republicans, particularly certain senators, oppose the unemployment benefits because that we need serfs that are vulnerable, economically vulnerable to take those jobs at the wages that we all want them at, and that's part of that politics as well. And it's just and of course closing the pipelines, making gas prices go up. Of course, this is the time of year when even without a pandemic, gas prices would be going up anyway.
Yeah, just one last thing that we can get in on our topic here. Like you alluded to, or actually you said straight up that some people are saying, hey, if you're overly generous with your unemployment insurance, then you're going to discourage people from working. And so there are over 20 Republican-led states that have already decided they were going to rescind their expanded unemployment insurance benefit as a way to discourage people from continuing to collect. Keeping in mind that, in fact, the reason that was extended out through the September was to give people time to, get vaccinated, get everything rolling forward ahead with childcare, education, summer camp, all those things, ways to get people to transition from the stay at home of the last year, basically. So that's a serious disagreement that actually will eventually be able to be tested in the states that did continue.
We've got a science experiment.
Yes, exactly.
I, Richard Billhouse Nixon, do solemnly swear.
I, Gerald R. Ford, do solemnly swear.
I, Jimmy Carter, do solemnly swear.
I, Ronald Reagan, do solemnly swear.
I, George Herbert Walker Bush, do solemnly swear.
I, William Jefferson Clinton, do solemnly swear.
I, George Walker Bush, do solemnly swear.
I, Barack Hussein Obama, do solemnly swear.
I, Donald John Trump, do solemnly swear.
I, Joseph Robinette Biden Jr., do solemnly swear. So help me God.
Related topic, the Senate parliamentarian, I have to read up on how she actually gets appointed. She's certainly not elected, has basically issued a ruling that reconciliation can only be used twice a year. The rule of reconciliation, of course, I'm going to oversimplify it as I have in the past shows, is that to avoid a filibuster, because right now pretty much you need 60 votes to pass anything in the Senate. To avoid a filibuster, you have to have a bill that is pretty much oriented towards the budget. It's got to be primarily, dealing with the budget and have an impact on the budget. And so spending bills and tax bills are necessarily that way, but she's also ruled that you can only do it twice and in a given year, and they've already done it for the pandemic relief bill earlier this year, and they've got two bills that they want to pass. The Democrats want to pass the infrastructure bill and the family bill, like $2 trillion for each, and they know the Republicans are going to oppose any kind of spending. On that level for the reasons we've already discussed and others. And so what we have is the Democrats thought they could basically muscle both of them through. Now they've got either pick or choose or combine them. And that's going to be difficult. And it's not like the Democrats have a whole lot of unity. There are a couple of senators that we've discussed on this show that are kind of in the way of that. And so infrastructure, there are negotiations going on. Biden does want to have a bipartisan thing. The Republicans want to limit it to bridges and oil pipes and roads. And the Democrats want to expand it to universal Wi-Fi and renewable energy infrastructure. And that's going to be an issue because I think what some Democrats were hoping was they could pass one more conventional, the one that makes the Republicans happy, than do another one. But if they're going to do it, they're going to have to combine it with the family bill. And so we're in a tight spot. And then the question is, that I think you wanted to ask is, well, how powerful is the parliamentarian? And is it just, well, I'll let you introduce your thoughts on that subject.
Yeah, sure. So a little background on how it's been used in the past. The reconciliation bill. Originally, 1974, it was designed literally just to reconcile the budget. So reconciliation rules since then have been used for anything with a budgetary impact, like you said, Eric, taxes and spending. the truth is that the reason this is useful is because it does not this bill, a reconciliation bill, does not have to be signed by the president, just by a simple majority of both chambers. They have this limited amount of self-control here, which is really just a custom or a practice, which is known as the Byrd rule. So there's a few ways to object, and like the changes that would fall under this category of reconciliation, it should be an incidental change. It can't be outside of the jurisdiction of the committees who are involved in the change of spending, and it can't increase the deficit outside the 10-year of the budget window that they look at. So if it follows those rules, then it can't be filibustered in part because they only talk about it for 20 hours and then they vote. So it doesn't need that 60. It's a special set of criteria there, and it happens very rarely because you need both chambers and you need the presidency, you need the White House. So that said, what was this parliamentarian's opinion? Basically, it was like a legislative history review. So there were members of staff from both the Republicans and the Democrats that attended a meeting with the parliamentarian, made some arguments. The parliamentarian had to come up with a finding on their critique of the usability and the scope of usability of this rule. And so the idea is that the parliamentarian said that the intent is not to have very many of these bills occur in the same year, that this should be an exception when something material, some situation has changed. So in other words, if there's a bill that's been set up for spending over a period of years and then something changes and they have to just kind of like make the budget add up, that was the original intention. So it's a small ball bill supposedly, but that rule has been blown out of the water. Like, for example, in 2017, what the tax bill that was passed, a multi-trillion-dollar tax cut, that's not small ball, and that's not a tweak to an existing thing that history has changed. And so I want to mention that it's not appropriate. Like what one of the key parts of this the parliamentarian found, which I think is interesting, it's they use this verbiage, which is automatically discharge onto the floor without a budget panel review. So part of this budget reconciliation is that the budget committee doesn't even typically get the opportunity to review it. But what the parliamentarian is saying is, that's not consistent with the senatorial custom and decorum, that practice of automatically discharging the bill without review in the budget committee, that actually needs to change. So the budget parliamentarian is like stuffed into the opinion is this finding that says it has to go through Senate Budget Committee, which is split 50-50. And then if the Republican 50% of those members refuses to participate, which we're going to talk about a quorum in a minute, a little bit later. Right. But so if they refuse to participate in this and there's no quorum because in the Senate proxies don't count, then there's the possibility that the Senate parliamentarian is saying, well, in fact, if it's not bipartisan, truly bipartisan, then maybe you shouldn't even use it at all. So the reason I'm mentioning this is because your original question, who is the parliamentarian? Why do we even listen? Well, the truth is that they don't have to listen at all. So my claim is that this is a cover. The cover. Yeah, I didn't want to say it in an overly wrong way. But the idea is that they're giving cover for a limited number of uses by saying, well, in fact, this whole thing ought not be used very often. And when it is, it's got to be extraordinarily rare cases. So keep your eye on the prize. We'll see how this goes down.
Well, we'll see what happens, and we'll be taking up again. I think I'm going to get it at the end talking about filibuster reform anyway. And I've got a prediction about that. But definitely we need to focus on the fact that the infrastructure, they're talking about making it bipartisan. Will this make it less likely that the Republicans will want to be bipartisan and pass anything? Or will the Democrats just figure, okay, we're just going to merge the other two bills and get those through because they do want to get the spending out there. They want to get the money into the economy, and they do want to start changing the infrastructure from fossil fuels to sustain what we call sustainable energy. these are big, huge issues, major part of Biden's agenda. And going back to the previous topic, apparently this Friday will be crucial in terms of how the parties frame it. I don't know if that's the case. We'll see. But at any rate, the things are being lined up so that it'll be a big battle on one thing, and then after that, it'll be up to the Republicans. They just need their 40 votes to block anything they want. So we'll see. Okay, there's been this audit in Arizona done by the the cyber ninjas or something at the request of Republicans, looking to find faults in the election process in one of the counties. They're talking about expanding it to Mariposa County. They are and there's been a lot of comedians talking about it. I mean, it's it's kind of crazy is what they're allowing them to do. They're allowed to take these ballots and do all kinds of things with them, which are apparently not supposed to be done. There's been a lot of complaints from the Secretary of State, who is a Democrat. The retaliation, they seem to be trying to limit her power. And now Pennsylvania's Republicans are coming to look at and see what they can learn from this audit. They are investigating everything from whether or not some of the papers are made of bamboo, to prove that it's from China, to other things. Nobody really understands what they're doing. They're supposedly going to be there all summer long unless the court shuts them down. But it's adding to this argument that the maintaining the big lie, as everybody on the one side are saying, that the election was stolen. And what do you want to hide if you're what are you trying to hide by trying to shut these audits down? Actually, there's only one right now, but even the future ones. Pennsylvania wasn't even close. It was 80,000 votes. I mean, close, but not not that close. And in conjunction with all of this, former President Trump has been telling people and leaking to the media that he expects to be reinstated as president by August. And my wife, who for some reason got herself onto a Trump text message list, just learned today that he's going to be doing a presidential speech on Saturday, the 25th. Whatever it is, the 5th. It's more craziness. Personally, I think Trump is just trying to raise money from gullible people. That's what he's, trying to do. I don't think he actually expects to be president in August, but how many people are going to believe him and how many people are going to be angry when it doesn't happen? I mean, it's a circus. And, I don't know, when you've got different realities that people live in, because they've got totally different news sources and different sets of facts that they're operating on, and something like 70% of all Republicans believe that the election was stolen and is invalid. What do you do with that? And how do we come out of that?
Oh my goodness, I think that's a rhetorical question. I don't know that you actually expect me to have an answer to.
I don't.
Yeah, okay, good. Yeah. So like you said, there's the Republican base. Approximately 75% of the people are still strongly supporting President Trump, strong or very strong. And there is a shared narrative about how the election was stolen. And so the question is, what's this voting audit thing in Arizona? Just to, and what does it even mean? I would say that there were audits already after the election. With no sign of discrepancy. Maricopa County already had two separate independent firms conduct audits.
The deep state ran those.
Right. Oh, yeah. I forgot that part. And so the state Senate subpoenaed the ballots, hired a firm called Cyber Ninjas, like you said, that really is not an audit firm and is not a ballot counting firm at all. no experience whatsoever, to count ballots. And like you said, they were scanning them under UV lights, and they're looking for, watermarks and bamboo paper because of who knows why. But this is all a narrative about a story, and I feel like it's team building. It's not a recount, it's not an audit, it's a partisan act. And rather than reassure people of voter integrity, it's really further eroding trust in elections. And I think that's by design, because you see the pattern. All the states, I don't know exactly how many, but there's a dozen or so states that are looking to pass voter integrity rules that really are voter suppression rules. So it's seemingly part of a cut from the same cloth. And then so you take it the next step further. You mentioned that Trump supposedly has leaked that he's maybe president again soon. But the truth is that that's not the case. I think barring some monster historic catastrophe, unprecedented catastrophe, something like that would never happen in our country.
Well, let me break in real quick and I'll let you finish. But General Flynn basically said what this country needs is a Myanmar-style coup. I mean, endorsing Myanmar's coup, and then later backed off it. But it just seems like there were a lot of people, Trump supporters, people I was talking to online, that expected a coup to happen on the 6th. They expected to take power, and have a junta and then have a real free election run by Trump, for sometime down the road, and after Biden was in jail and all that. I mean, they really believed it. And so with Flynn fanning these flames, and what happened in the 6th, I don't know. It's democracy. We have some pretty strong institutions in this country, but boy, that could really put strains on those on the integrity of that, on the foundation of it.
And it's like a tale of two cities, where there's this narrative about how there was a voting problem, the steal, and that narrative is continuing. But the tale of two cities is like Flynn was interviewed after that event, where you could watch the video when someone in the audience says the Myanmar comparison of a military junta forcing a political change, and Flynn says yes. I mean, it's obvious. You could see it on video yourself. But then when he's interviewed, he said, no, I didn't say that, and I don't believe that. So they're speaking to the base on this narrative, like you said, possibly that there's, for fundraising purposes or for team building purposes, and whatever other justification they have to rally this base that thinks that Trump is their leader. But in fact, there's not leadership there. I mean, there's not. I highly doubt that this is all for the purpose of leading our country. I think it's more team building exercises. Maybe
geared towards the 2022 midterm election, trying to keep their base energized. And if they think it's been stolen again, that's what they'll do. They need them to turn out. I mean, that base did turn out in record numbers. A lot of people who never voted before came out in 2020. It wasn't enough because there were a lot of people that came out that wanted it over. But it is a lot of people, and this is a significant problem we have in this country right now.
Yeah, and just one last thought on this is that you see how at what cost, right? So people are talking about the misinformation and the disinformation, undermining integrity, undermining trust, like I said. But what it appears anyway on the surface to me is that you've got the situation where I'm trying to think of the right way to say this, actually, but like 800 people stormed the Capitol. Ultimately, 400 of them were arrested. 200 of them are part of military or militia-backed groups. So it's a very, very small set of people. And similarly, the whole QAnon thing, like you got Marjorie Taylor Greene and you got others who, very, very small number of people who think that that's even worth your time to talk about or think about. But because it's so extraordinary and because it's so threatening and because it's so outrageous, it's sucking all the air out of the room. So my hope is that, like I said in last week's show, or 2 weeks ago, whenever we did that, my hope is that, it might take through the 2022 cycle for people to realize, but by the 2024 cycle, I feel like the Republican Party might get a better handle on all this madness.
Maybe, if they're still around.
Today, we celebrate the triumph not of a candidate, but of a cause. The cause of democracy.
We are going to raise issues that, historically have not been raised.
What about the nuclear option, doing away with the filibuster? I can tell you that would be the end of the Senate as it was originally devised.
All of this is possible for America. Who was standing in the way? Mitch McConnell.
Where an insurrection that sought to overturn an election, when that failed, the action moved into state capitals.
Pandemic status. Things are going pretty well. The hospitalization rates and the infection rates are low. Maybe everywhere except Humboldt County isn't doing as well as everybody else right now in California anyway. California actually in general is doing really well. But there does seem to be a stubborn portion of the population resisting vaccinations. So a lot of some states are trying to be innovative and create incentives, lottery, opportunities to win a car, or even coupons for guns in West Virginia. I mean, some really interesting incentives, even just money that they're talking about. Because they really want people to do it, especially young people, because a lot of young people have a feeling like this doesn't really is something that affects them, and they don't see, they don't believe that they're carriers of it, and so it's just something that's really concerned for older people and people with compromised immune systems, and it's not. There are some random DNA factors that have perfectly healthy people are getting sick, and some of them even dying from it. But we do seem to be reaching an inertia of slowdown with regard to the vaccinations. And one of the things that, the economy can't stand is if we'd have to go back into some type of a shutdown. That would just be really catastrophic. So they're offering incentives. It almost makes me wish I'd waited. Maybe I could get a free sandwich or something. I don't know. But anyway, what are your thoughts?
So luckily for you, in California, our incentive structure is going to be eligible. Everybody who is already vaccinated is also eligible. So we're all in the pool for some of these smaller prizes, and there's actually some pretty, larger financial incentives as well. So I would say, big picture, I think it's a great idea. We know that it's highly important for herd immunity to really take hold, that we reach a critical mass of that 70 to 80% number. Yeah. Right. Especially in light of the fact that people are very suspicious and mistrustful of institutions generally. And also, I would say that the pandemic information campaign to discredit Trump's theory or his the Republican Party theory that it was a leak from a lab in Wuhan, calling that racist and xenophobic on the face of it without actually looking at the background. There's a new wave of doubt and mistrust and distrust, knowing that there's an article out there. I think the author's name is Wade, where he pretty clearly spells out, the potential for that to be something that's viable. Former CDC Chair Gottlieb actually was making the rounds this weekend, saying that there's no proof of either, the sort of natural organic from bats versus there's no proof that it leaked from the lab.
No, but one of the big things that they are talking about is the fact that most natural pandemics tend to become less virulent because of defenses that raise. This one has become even more dangerous as it's sure. Evolved in certain parts, and that's led a lot of people to suspect it. But why then, if I believe that this is coming from a lab, and maybe it very much did, and was intended for germ warfare or whatever, that would make me want to get in a vaccine more, right. And it seems, So I would hope that that's how they would take it. It's like, okay, this is serious stuff.
Yeah, it's very serious. And just I'm going to pivot to your the point you raised. If gain of function really did make it stronger, which some of the evidence appears that might have been the way to be determined. Like I said, CDC chair, former chair Gottlieb said that might be the case. So let's just let him be the authority here. How are we going to react to that? Well, if there is a apparently 95% effective vaccine out there, then it's about messaging and clarity and consistency to the folks that are most at risk, most vulnerable, and most reluctant. So this pandemic incentive idea that I think it started out, like I saw it in Ohio with $1 million lottery. Some other states offered like beer and other things that they were like, maybe we just give them this or give them that. It's a great idea. You may, take advantage of the human nature to want to attain some incentive out of it, and let's try to get folks on board.
I agree, and yeah, and again, the media may possibly drop the ball. It does look like there's at least some evidence that it did come from a laboratory. I don't know that everybody had completely rejected it, and I don't know why it's so important politically, other than, well, we need to get on China for doing that, but other people are doing it too, and so do we get on them for doing the experiments? And what do we do about the second strongest economy in the world? If it does turn out to be true, these are all questions, but at least if we know it, that might help address how we respond to it too, and what's happening. Anyway, of course, Trump is doing the "I told you so" thing, and the media did reject it, and a lot of people did as crazy. It wasn't so much the idea that it came from a laboratory that was racist. It was this constant reference to it as the Chinese flu or the Wuhan flu, because it draws an association, and it's what has gotten part of what has gotten Asians attacked more than normally over the past year. So it's simple. I hope that this revelation doesn't lead to an increase in that again.
And I would just say the otherization and xenophobia aside, because certainly that's what I believe that was Trump's intention, and to a broader extent, I think that's his party in general has engaged in that type of activity, that type of discourse, which is offensive on the merits.
And also to distract from his abject failure, to prevent what happened. So
I would say that it is important to get to the bottom of it, in part because so that Wade article includes a couple of elements, not to get super into the weeds on this, but one element is that the United States did partially fund the lab, and the scientists that were put forward to evaluate if it was a lab leak or not, one in particular was funded by the WTO, and he is engaged in that type of activity. And so the United States and China together, our money together, that lab together, this line of study together, and there are a lot of folks who just didn't want to be questioned, I think. So it's where it makes sense to question it, but not get hyperbolic about it. In part because, and here's the thing that I think is worth mentioning, it's a very dangerous thing when you are genetically modifying mice to replicate the human immune system and then tweaking the protein structure of coronavirus in the lab to better infect those mice so that you can create better medicines for those future coronavirus outbreaks. And so the question is, yes, it's dangerous. And so are we going to treat it as if it is dangerous? Well, it turns out that labs leak, every year. It's just it just happens. And so are they doing this level 4 biohazard safety protocol, level 3, level 2? Turns out they're using level 2 in most of these instances, and maybe that's not enough. So in terms of the cost and comfort of the research, in other words, literally the comfort of the scientists in the lab, are they comfortable, doing this level 2 versus maybe we ought to be a little bit more rigid about the safety protocols when engaging in this gain of function type research? That I think is part of of the bigger picture that they, science are experts, it's their field, but it became political, unfortunately.
Unfortunately, yeah. And, and that's something you can kind of blame the left on a little bit. Even I was kind of dismissive of it, although, it's one hell of a coincidence that it broke right near where the laboratory is. So, that is a coincidence that always probably should have been worth looking at. So hopefully we learn something from it. I don't know if it'll help medically or deal with the situation. And I hope it sounds like it wasn't for biowarfare or anything,
Right.
I mean, it wouldn't be doing that with all of those entities involved. So, but it does sound like there needs to be some accountability for it. And definitely we'd like to know what happened and how it did get out, if that's at all possible at this point. Don't mess with Texas. The battleground over voting rights and voter suppression and or election integrity, depending on how you look at it, has gone to Texas. And the Republicans introduced a bill that I think not all of them particularly liked. We'll discuss that, but that would, among other things, make it easier to allow for a judge to overturn an election without even necessarily having to show who voted or how they voted. It brings it down to a propensity of the evidence rather than a stronger, clear and convincing evidence standard. It shuts down Sunday early voting before 1 o'clock. That's like patently designed to shut down the African American souls to vote campaigns that happen on Sunday, where people go straight from church to vote. I mean, there's no other rational reason for it unless it's football games. But probably one of the most draconian yet from the voter rights perspective. Of course, the advocates are saying, it makes it easier to vote, but harder to cheat, and again, part of the big lie, like there was some massive cheating going on that affected the election results. So anyway, the bill was introduced, and then at the level of their House, I forget what they call it, Democrats left. Just before the deadline, and left the room, and there was a lack of quorum, and it killed the bill. They're going to have to start over. Governor Abbott is throwing a fit, threatening to veto the salaries of all of the lawmakers. Apparently something before his desk, which would be interesting because it would also, defund the Republican salaries if he was to put off with it. I think they could actually pass it without his signature anyways, or without and override his veto. I'm sure everybody's going to want to get paid. But it's interesting that we're at this, and Abbott is threatening to call a special session to get it back in. He wants this thing passed. Of course, he's got a lot of people that are going to be running against him the next time around. He'd certainly like to have the option of being able to shut down and keep certain people from voting. Your thoughts, David?
Yeah, so as you said, this is designed, it's called a voter integrity bill, but it's designed to make voting more difficult. And if you look at the specific elements, like, for example, it wants to make mail voting in particular more difficult. No absentee ballot without a specific request. Just to be clear, crystal clear for anybody that's watching and listening, there are already 2 states, Utah and Oregon, with 100% mail vote. Yeah. And they function perfectly fine, all of their elections. So it's a narrative. This is a narrative. This is part of what we talked about earlier in the show about, it's called the big lie. I think that's a dismissive way of kind of sidelining the merits. I prefer to focus on the merits. But so one element of this, which reveals how it's intended to discourage voting versus encourage it. It literally blocks election officials from engaging in activity with get out the vote groups to encourage vote by mail. So in other words, if the law is, if they're saying you can't get a mail ballot without requesting it, okay. But then you're saying you can't work with somebody who tells people that they should request a ballot. Yeah. So that's a little disingenuous, right? And then you look at similar bills in Florida and Georgia with similar language, and you realize it's a national campaign to suppress the vote in key states where Republicans have the leadership. And then, like you said, I think that this is a really poignant element of the rule. Prohibit after hours and drive-through voting. Prohibit Sunday voting, souls to polls programs. Basically, you can't just get in a bus and leave church and go to the election office and vote because it's not going to be open. So they are literally closing down, like we have here in California. We've got these boxes that, like, for example, Murphy's up the street. They're open till 10 p.m. I could go there from 7 a.m. to 10 p.m. and drop my ballot in the ballot box. Mm-hmm. They don't want that. So this is it's voter suppression by another name. I'm not going to go so far as to say right. It's voter suppression. I'll leave it there. And I'll leave you to comment on that.
Sure. Well, I mean, the idea is to reduce the votes and reduce the number of people voting. One of the things that happened this last election, people have asked, what happens if they throw an election and everybody comes? Well, people were, in their pandemic, so they were in their houses, so they were paying attention. They mailed their ballots in, and we had record number of people vote, and and a record number of African American people that voted. And it made the difference in places like Georgia, and they're freaking out. They don't know what to do. The Republicans don't seem to have a strategy even for trying to draw more people of color in, even though they actually picked up votes percentage-wise of every group of color. With the exception, I think, of Muslims, Arabs, but they picked up with African Americans. They gained more votes of that. So they could strategize, but in order for them to nail that home, they probably have to change policies in ways they really don't want to. And so, to really have a chance for that. So rather than that, they'd rather make it more difficult for working people to vote. And, while it's real encouraging when you see those big, huge lines in Atlanta and in Pennsylvania where, they're going down the block and it shows how wonderful democracy is, the fact of the matter is there's a lot of people driving there that say, I just don't have time for this, and drive home. I got to go pick up my kids. I thought it would be quicker, and when you're passing ridiculous rules like where you can't feed them or bring them water, it's patently ridiculous. It's whether you want to call it voter suppression or not, because it's not depriving people necessarily of the right to vote. It's depriving people of the convenience to vote. Here you could have a setup with the elections office that if you want to receive a absentee ballot every election, you just have to have your name on the list. They're going to require you have to request it every single election, and people don't necessarily remember all the time. But if it's automatic, if they got it on an automatic setup, the ballot shows up at their home. They're going to sit down with it after dinner, fill it out, and send it back. I mean, that's how it works. But if your goal is fewer voters, that's what these laws are intended to do. They really don't add anything in terms of integrity. It's not like there's been any evidence of massive voter fraud. And the irony is that the dozen or so voter fraud that got caught up with, I think like 10 out of the 12 were Republicans. There's been no evidence of an undocumented immigrant voting. I think it's happened like once in the past 20 years that they found. So it was just again, it's creating a problem. But when basically the idea is that you want to win elections, and Republicans, some of them have stated outright, we cannot win elections if this many people vote. They've said it. I mean, in plain daylight.
And there's audio recordings of it too. And so Eric, you're the lawyer. Maybe you can put a finer point on this. But the Civil Rights Act, one element of it did have right up through the very recent past, from the last 50 years, a prior review element for states that had a history of exhibiting voter suppression that were violations of civil rights. And so that way, if they were going to change their voting laws in any way, then there was an element of the Justice Department that got to take a look at it and determine. Yeah. So do you mind telling us?
Yeah, it's actually the Voting Rights Act, not
there
the
you go,
Civil
Voting
Rights
Act.
And yes, a Supreme Court decision pretty much took that away. Said, oh, we don't have just voting discrimination based on race in this country anymore. We don't need to keep doing this. We're just we're just giving these states a hard time. Of course, these are states that manage to gerrymander like crazy. The South is about the most gerrymandered area in the country, at least from the Republican side. I think gerrymandering for the Democrats' benefit has happened in Maryland, arguably Illinois, although that's debatable. But the gerrymandering, and these changes would at least have to be subject to review. And the Justice Department would look at it. They could make recommendations to the court, and it just made everything up and up. What is the impact on this? And even if there was a disparate impact, it wouldn't necessarily invalidate the law if it was reasonable. And if but if there was a reasonable alternative that could accomplish the same goals, then they were obligated to adopt that reasonable alternative. Now they're free to do whatever they want. And unless this Voting Rights Act passes in Congress, which it doesn't look like it's going to, unless the filibuster is set aside for it, and it's not a reconciliation type bill. So yeah, I mean it's really bad because Georgia couldn't have passed these laws. This law that they passed. I don't think Florida was ever on that list, so I think they did it. I'm not even sure about Texas, but Alabama, Arkansas, and North Carolina. So we'll see what happens. Stay tuned with that. But that takes us to our final segment. It's time for predictions. Dave, what do you got for us?
Well, this is a bold one. I don't know. I'm not like pumping my arms here that I think that this is actually going to happen. But I believe it to be the case that Joe Biden wants, and his administration want so strongly and so badly want to be perceived as bipartisan that they will accept the half a loaf of the $900+ billion infrastructure in good faith to show that they can work across party lines for the infrastructure bill. And that gives them cover for not having to use too many, of the reconciliation bill, the full scope of what's possible with the reconciliation bill. So that's one prediction. Should I do two?
Go ahead if you got them.
Okay. Yeah. So my second prediction is that there's going to be significant backlash at that the corporatist small ball, not that it's small ball, I take that back, but limited infrastructure vision, and that will push through in part because there's the timeline to try to get this bill passed by August, by the recess. But after that, there'll be a more significant push for more increased funding for the broader definition of infrastructure, like broadband and some of the other more expansive, more ambitious, more progressive infrastructure commitments that were in the original proposal.
Okay, I'll just add to that real quickly. I think they're going to jam the progressive elements of the proposed infrastructure bill in with the family bill. I think that's what they're going to have to do. They're just going to do it all at once, and they'll ram that one through, and that'll be it for the year for reconciliation. My prediction, however, is I just looking at Joe Manchin made a speech recently attacking Republicans for taking advantage of things and putting pressure on him towards filibuster reform. He's been making speeches attacking the Republicans for it. Biden has apparently been talking with Manchin and Sinema, kind of ribbed him publicly a little bit. I am actually predicting that Manchin will not agree to to totally ditch the filibuster, but will be open to reform, such as maybe requiring the old type of filibuster, like from what Jimmy Stewart did, that type of thing, but maybe not quite as hard. It doesn't have to be one person. They can hand it off, that type of thing. And the other possibility is they can maintain the 60-40 for actual vote, but that they can't prevent debate. Because once the debate happens, then it becomes a public issue. And if everybody knows it's going to be filibustered, that gives opportunities for public pressure to possibly to push them. I don't know that public pressure can affect the Republicans at this point. But, I think they're just totally wrapped up in, right now appeasing the Trump base. And that's the only pressure they care about. Or there could be civil war. Who knows? But we'll talk about that next time. Thank you, David. I want to thank Matt. Until next time, keep thinking.